Excellent. And I'm just going to take a quick look to see if we've got any members who are in as attendees.
That would be Chair Alvin Edwards.
Oh, there's only one. You're right. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and do a roll call.
All right. John Tilley. Scott Ditt.
I'm here.
Scott's here.
I'm
Yeah.
here.
Mayor Peak.
Here.
Kevin Urquhart. Mike Rachel. Marley Mountain.
Yeah, Mike's here. I just didn't hear him.
Marley Mountain.
Marley's on mute.
Here.
Melody Crislott.
Here.
Jason Campbell.
Here.
Susan Schiavone.
Present.
All right. Going back to Mike Rachel. Mike, I just want to. Okay,
Right.
good to go. So
Thanks.
the only members absent from this meeting is Kevin Urquhart and John Tilley.
And John probably will show up because I think he expressed an interest in being on. Thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to try to get this done in an hour. We have some things to talk about, but we're also in need of your thoughts as we prepare for the annual report, which is item 3. So that'll be some important discussion. But to get us started, are there any comments from the public not related to items on the agenda? And we're up to 2 attendees.
Just moved over Kevin Urquhart.
Okay. So that was our second attendee, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So no comments from the public. We can move on to action items. Item number 1 is consider adoption of the minutes. Were there any changes or edits anyone saw that were needed in the minutes from July 8th? Hearing none, I'll take a motion for approval or adoption rather.
I move to approve. I move that we adopt.
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, well, we had competing motions, but we'll give it to Jason.
Sounds good.
You always
Yay.
get. Yay.
All right. So that's a motion by Jason Campbell and then a second by Marley Mountain.
No, I think it was Susan Schiavone.
Susan Schiavone. All right. Sounds good. Roll call vote. John Tilley. Scott Ditt.
Yes.
Mayor Peak.
Aye.
Kevin Urquhart. Mike Rachel.
Yes.
Marley Mountain.
Aye.
Melody Crislott.
Yes.
Jason Campbell.
Aye.
Susan Schiavone.
Yes.
Going back to Kevin Urquhart.
It's on mute.
Let me ask him to unmute. All right. The motion passes.
Yep, it was an aye. I finally unmuted my end.
Okay, sounds good.
Excellent. So the first discussion item, or item 2 on the agenda, is review of revenue and expenditures, the water supply charge related to water supply activities. Suresh, I'll let you walk us through. We have added a new chart, which actually relates a little bit to item 4 on this agenda. But Suresh, why don't you take us through?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dave. Exhibit 2C, we will be talking about that under item 4, but we will definitely go over Exhibit 2A and 2B on this one. So Exhibit 2A is basically the water supply charge receipts all the way through June 30th, 2021 collections. We had budgeted $3.3 million. As you can see, the highlighted column, the gray column, 2021 unaudited actuals came in at $3.4 million. The reason why the 3.3 was because we were in the midst of COVID and we had no idea what the impact was going to be. So we had slightly reduced the collections, but happy to report that COVID collection did not have any impact at all. So it came in a little over 3.4. Exhibit 2B is the actual numbers through, again, June 30th, 2021. These are, again, unaudited actuals. We are going through the audit process, and those numbers would be audited by towards the end of the year, but the numbers would not change. Looking at the collections, the top part, which is total revenues, we had budgeted about a little over $13 million. Total collections were $13.9 million. Water supply charge was right in line. Capacity fee was a little bit higher than what was budgeted. PWM sales, we had, again, when we did the mid-year budget, we had estimated what the water sales was going to be. We had estimated it to be about $4.8 million for the 9 months of the year, and it turned out to be 5.9. But that does not have any impact to the bottom line, because on the flip side, we do have the water purchase cost. So that's basically a washout, but we don't net it out. We still have to show it as revenues and expenses. And then the project reimbursements, much lower than what we had anticipated. And those are basically just kind of like a guesstimate numbers when we put together a budget. The property tax was a little bit higher than what we had estimated it to be. User fee, slightly lower than what was anticipated. The interest income was a little bit lower than what was budgeted. And then reclamation project, pretty much right in line. The $500,000 is basically a repayment from the reclamation project that we had financed a project back in November 2019, I want to say.
And keep in mind, everybody, that this is the same format that several people have said is too overcomplicated. And when you see user fee, that's just the amount of the user fee that was dedicated to water supply projects. The actual collections of user fees will be discussed later on the agenda, but are used primarily for the environmental mitigation program and the conservation program. So again, this is just a slice of the activities that the district does related to water supply, and doesn't reflect 100% of revenues that come into the district for some of these other sources. Yeah, Marley.
What is the total budget of the water district? What?
We'll let Suresh answer.
Yeah, $29 million or $28 million.
Okay, so about twice what we're seeing on this report.
Correct.
Yes.
This is just the water supply charge portion of it.
And it's just gone up quite a bit as we've gotten into the wholesaling of pure water Monterey water. And as Suresh mentioned earlier, basically the expenditures that we make to purchase that water are covered by the revenues that we make in turning it over to Cal-Am. We now are accumulating a little bit higher sale price to Cal-Am than the purchase price from Pure Water Monterey because of some expenditures that we, the district, incurred that are added into the current year budget. So the overall budget of the district has risen because of the purchase and sale of water. And we're still doing quite a bit of water supply projects. So as the capital construction winds down, you should see the budget decline a little bit as well.
Dave,
Yeah,
and all just point of order.
Please, go ahead.
Point of order. I'm going to go camera off. I'm getting internet connection problems. Hearing you guys chop up. So I'm hoping that'll affect my audio, and I'll get a better hearing. Just want to let you know that's why I'm visually disappearing.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
And if it's bad, I'll call back in on the phone line.
Sounds good.
Yeah, the budget did go up by about $10 million. That's what the PWM water sales is. So prior to that, it was about $18 to $19 million budget. On the expenses side, we split it up by the direct personal cost and the direct supplies and services. And I'm kind of like midway into on the page of Exhibit 2B. Then we have the legal cost, the project expenses for both the reimbursements and non-reimbursement. And those are the summary lines. The details on the project expenses are towards the bottom part of the page, where it's identified by individual projects. And we'll go over that in just a minute here. Fixed asset expenses or purchases, then we have contingencies, debt service, election expenses, and then the indirect labor and indirect supplies, services and supplies, and then the reserve. And the reason for the direct and indirect is basically because we're doing the indirect cost as a percentage of water supply charge. That's one of the charges in the Ordinance 152. And so basically we have to track that. So you'll see at the bottom of the page, right below the project expenses, you'll see the indirect cost, the percentages attributed there. And so we need to maintain that within 15%. And so just to let you know that the indirect cost is about 12%. And then going into the project expenses, Dave may want to share some of those in detail. But the Pure Water Monterey project, then we have the operating reserve, and then we have the water purchase. And this is what I was talking about, the water purchase versus the water sale. So this is where we've identified the project. ASR phase 1 cost, and then the reimbursement projects, which are all the reimbursement projects, either from California America or projects related to CalAM projects or any other reimbursements. And then we have Measure J feasibility study. And again, that's just a portion that's attributed to the water supply fund. And then the other project expenses. So all in all, the total project cost for the year was $11.1 million. Dave, you want to highlight on any of the projects?
No, I think you covered it. The big number, of course, is the water purchase costs, some of which, well, to distinguish it from the operating reserve is water that's purchased and kept by the district. And then water purchase is water that's purchased and resold to CalAM. That's the only difference.
Question. On the legal expenses, does that include Measure J, or is that broken out into Measure J separately? How does that?
Yeah,
go?
that
Is
does.
all of the legal in one place? Okay.
Yeah, no, that does not include the Measure J legal, because Measure J, we kind of like treat that as a project itself. So anything related to Measure J, whether it be consulting fee, legal fee, eminent domain fee, all of those are captured in the Measure J.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clear that.
So that's what Exhibit 2B is. And then again, Exhibit 2C, we will actually discuss that as item number 4, because that is what we are proposing is a much more simplified version of this report.
And I've got a good idea. Why don't we swap item 3 and item 4, and let's just go right into this chart. So the item 4 issue. Oh, well, item 4 is the next one. Sorry about that.
Well, there's item 3 as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Item 3 is discussion, right? So let's pick up item 4. And there were a couple of things that were asked about. One is trying to simplify the water supply charge report. Let's pick that one up first. And so we can either look at the Exhibit 4A or Exhibit 2C. They're the same exhibit.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to describe what you've done here?
Yes, so basically what we've done is we've simplified this and we said, okay, what's all the water supply collection has been since it was put in place. And so we've compiled all the water supply charge under the revenue section, and then we did all of the expenses relating to water supply charge fund. And you can see those expenses are kind of like laid out, and the format is basically coming directly from our audited financial statements, and these statements are readily available on our website. And so we've kept it in the same categories as it is identified in the audit report. So all in all, you'll see the expenses broken out by personal salaries versus benefits and others. And then under the service and supplies, we have the project expenses, and then the operating expenses, professional fee, capital outlay, and then under debt service, you have the principal and interest. And then, so that's the combination, the net difference between what was collected as water supply charge versus what was spent out related to water supply charge fund projects. And then we also, what we did was we also brought in the project reimbursements and the PWM water sales and the grants, because those costs are actually captured in the expenditure column. And so basically we had to bring those revenues as well, but we kind of like separated them from our sort of like our operating revenue to non-operating revenue. And then bottom line, you'll see the very last line is the net difference of what was collected through water supply charge and what was actually spent. And just a little disclaimer, 2021 is the unaudited numbers. That's where you have the asterisk, but from 2020 through 2013, those are our final audited numbers. So at the end of the, at the end of the day, when the water supply charge actually started collected, and what we have spent to date, you can see that we've collected about $30 million in water supply charge. We've spent about $60 million in project cost. And then we have brought in about, let's say $20 million in the other revenue sources. So the bottom line is net deficit is about $10 million, 9.2. And that's what's being subsidized when you look at the detail charge. That's what's being subsidized by the property tax and the user fee that's attributed to the water supply charge fund. So the $10 million is covered from that.
Right, and some things you don't see here that you will see in a while, as time passes, is we did pay down $500,000 on the Mechanics Bank loan from surplus revenues that occurred during last fiscal year. And so that occurred in August of this year. So it'll show up in the next fiscal year, the 2022 fiscal year. So back where you see debt service, principal, and interest, there'll be a big jump in the the principal payment. Also, the remaining principal, which is about 2.3 million, I believe. Suresh, correct me if I'm too far.
You're right. It's somewhere close to 2.3.
Remains an obligation that's secured by the water supply charge. So, we're doing everything we can to pay that off, but that's kind of lurking out there. And then as you look at the very bottom line, so in 2013, when we began collecting the water supply charge, we actually did have a surplus. And that's because we also got some project reimbursements, and we didn't have much expenditure in that year. But all the way until 2018, again, reading right to left, we had deficits until 2018. And the reason in 2018 was this rather significant project reimbursement. And that was because we received a very large chunk of state revolving fund reimbursement for our pre-construction funding of the Pure Water Monterey project. So that was booked in that year, but it was against prior year expenditures. But the takeaway is that the water supply charge itself is insufficient to meet all the needs of our water supply related activities. And so we have been subsidizing. Any questions on this chart, and does that kind of simplify anything for anybody, or did we just make another piece of complexity? John has his hand up. Go ahead, John.
Okay, good. Unmuted. Thanks for this. I see what's going on with it. I'd actually say it's kind of the other way. I would say that the water supply charge supplements the user fee, or either one. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Dave, with the Pure Water Monterey water sales, the 5.9 type figure that's appearing in 2021, is that a number that will be of a similar magnitude going forward? And will those funds provide cash flow to backfill these expenditures, as you're seemingly pointing out the water supply charge is needed to do?
Right. Yeah, the answer is that it will go up for 2022. I think it's closer to 8 million.
It's $10 million for the whole year.
10 million, okay. And then it'll go up due to escalation in labor, chemicals, and energy, just in the O&M expense side. But the water sales don't recover any of the prior deficit, if you will. So when the board adopted their policy on, well, actually twice now, they've reconfirmed that their goal is to take surplus user fees and apply it first to the payment of the Mechanics Bank loan, second to this accumulated deficit to repay the other accounts and reserves that were used to subsidize water supply, and then third to sunsetting the water supply charge. So that $9.3 million deficit is something that by board policy at this point in time, they want to repay themselves, but through the user fee. And then once that's done and that deficit's wiped out, start sunsetting. And we can talk about that a little bit more in both in the annual report discussion and the closed session item, but that's what's happening. So there's no additional payback, if you will. I do know that the way Monterey One Water works is they do have an administrative overhead charge that helps them repay some interfund borrowing. So when we pay for the price of water, they are doing a little bit of what you were suggesting, which is repaying some prior expenditures.
Thanks for this again. And I'll tell you, when I look at these financials and I see the pressure that's on the district for just and M1W in hand and Cal-Am at the same time, just to generate the funding to build out our water supply, be it the expansion of Pure Water Monterey or anything else. And then I layer on top of that the potential of a $20 million liability due to Measure J. It causes me really deep concern about the potential financial situation in the district. I'll just say that and leave it in the air.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think what a number of people forget when they hone in on that 20 million, that's representing legal expenses from both parties. So as if we had the legal expenses of Cal-Am on the hook if we were successful in an acquisition. What would really happen if we were successful? I'm sorry, if we were not successful. If we are successful and those legal expenses get paid, they get rolled into the capital cost. And so it would go into the borrowing. If we are not successful or we choose to walk away, then we'd be on the hook for their expenses. But the 20 million figure that's been tossed around actually includes both ours and theirs, and ours we're paying as we go. So it's, we've been covering,
So
I forget
far.
what the number is now, but so far we've been covering it. And, we look forward the next couple of years, we'll still be covering that. And that'll take us into, if the board elects to move on this, take us into the bench trial. So it's not like it's a future total liability that's out there. A lot of it's paid to go. I see that Mayor Peak has his hand up.
Thank you very much for this table exhibit 2C. I just had a question for next year. Will the water supply fund operate at a $3 million loss?
That's a very good question. I suspect it will still operate at a loss because if you look at the personnel expenses, these are guys who are going around doing water quality sampling and design work and things like that. The project expenditures will go down, except for the purchase of water, which will remain high. But we'll have an offsetting revenue for the purchase of water. So what really drives these deficits has been project expenditures. So ASR is pretty close to being buttoned up. Pure Water Monterey in the current fiscal year, we've got about a $3.4 million expenditure, so almost a complete offset for another deep injection well. But because we've all elected to move forward with the expansion, we're back into pre-construction funding. And I can't predict what that's going to be, but I suspect it's we're not going to see reimbursement from the state revolving fund for 2 years. So it quite easily could be a deficit again because of pure water expansion.
Yes, no, Dave, just to add, it will definitely be a deficit on this chart because the water supply charge is only 3.4, and as you had mentioned, the most of that DIW4, which is a deep injection well 4, and then also keep in mind we also have the operating reserve that we will be behind as well. So it'll definitely, the project expense is not going to be to the magnitude of about $11 million, but it'll definitely be about $4 to $6 million.
Yeah, that's right. Suresh mentioned the operating reserve. So we've funded up the operating reserve to about 1,200 acre feet. And by 2023, by September 1 of 2023, that figure needs to get to 1,750 acre feet. And so we will be paying for water with no offsetting water sales revenues. So yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else? Okay, let's talk a little bit about, yeah.
Just a comment, Dave, that what I was going to suggest to the committee members then is we will be adding this Exhibit 4A as part of Exhibit C on the other table as well. So you will get both the detailed version and the summary version.
Yep. So the other request through the committee was, can't we allocate the water supply charge to specific projects? And when those projects are done, then that's over and you can retire the, that piece of the water supply charge. And, systemically in all of these charts you're looking at is the reason we can't do so. And what would really happen is if we said, okay, we're going to apply the water supply charge to aquifer storage and recovery. Then as soon as aquifer storage and recovery is finished, because we're running this fund at a deficit every year, it would just be reallocated to some other project. It couldn't retire. So until we bring the deficit down to zero, which would be a combination of paying off the deficit from user fees and slowing the pace of construction and getting into the point of just operating these projects rather than building these projects, then there's always going to be a need for the water supply charge on something. So you can't really just put it to one particular project and then once that project's done, the charge is over and sunset. But there is, if there's any light at the end of the tunnel, I do see that we'll hit a point where we're in operations mode, not building mode. And we should be able to bring this fund area back into balance and begin sunsetting. So I don't know if you have anything to amplify on that, Suresh.
No, you've said it all.
Okay. Any questions on that issue? Marley.
This is Jason.
I just wanted to add that once you finish building a project, you probably need to do maintenance on one of your earlier projects. So
Yeah.
It's not as if projects are finished and then they're not expensive anymore.
That is such a spot on point. I don't know if you all remember that Monterey One Water went through a rate raising exercise, a Prop 218 rate setting process that caught a lot of attention. And that was due in no small part to significant deferred maintenance, which became, in effect, a new capital project. So Marley's right. I mean, that's the way the world works. Some of you know that because that's happening in your businesses or cities you run or wastewater boards you sit on. So you know all that. But anyway, John, I saw your hand go up and then come down. Did you have a question?
Am I muted here? No. I just, I did ask somewhat for this kind of chart to be developed. I think that the expenditures, to some extent, you were speaking of it, are also the target of the user fee. So there's more, both the water supply charge and the user fee can be put toward these expenditures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the in the not too distant future, one of the things that we have to contemplate, because the user fee is a percentage of the CalAm fixed and variable water bill. And as their rates go up, then the user fee goes up. And so just by virtue of that, we'll hit a tipping point where you can actually flip from one to the other, and that would enable sunsetting. We'd have to pay off the Mechanics Bank loan because it's specifically secured by the water supply charge. But, we have to actually either pay it off or refinance it in 2 years. So, there would be a tipping point on that as well. But you're right, John, in that a lot of the personnel costs or consultant costs could come from either source. And just because it's related to water supply, we've been including it in the water supply fund. But yeah, at some point, I can envision moving more user fee over to the water supply fund. Marley again.
Yes, I was just noticing that you came in very close to what you budgeted. In fact, a little over budget, even though some of the people paying the water supply charge may have had pretty bad financial years, and because of the pandemic and the effect on some of the businesses that operated. Did you receive requests to have the charge lowered, or are you receiving those?
No. So what's interesting is a lot of the utilities have seen non-payment or slow payment. And so our user fee, we expected, because it's a percentage on the CalAm bill, we expected to see higher delinquencies in that. I don't want to get into the details, but I think that the way CalAm's internal accounting is working is they're issuing our percent based on billed water sales, not collected water sales. And so it remained fairly stable. And then on the water supply charge, we elected to use the county tax collector as our collection mechanism. And you'll see on your tax bill, there's always a few fees, and then there's bonded indebtedness and such that are not property taxes, but they're collected that way. And they made it so hard to get a waiver for paying your taxes due to COVID that I think very few people took them up on it. I mean, it was really a challenge to demonstrate your hardship and then get a delay or a waiver of paying your property taxes. So since we're collected along with all of that, it was very secure. So that's why it came in where it did.
Well, in the ordinance, it says that people can appeal their charges, but.
Right. Now, the only appeals we've gotten have been from the U.S. Postal Service, and then some half-hearted appeals from a couple of the military installations. But generally, people have not appealed for, and those appeals were more about jurisdiction, not about the ability to pay.
Yeah, we don't have an appeal process for hardships.
Yeah.
You do not?
Yeah, it's an appeal process for if we miscategorized or put it on the wrong property parcel.
Yeah, if a property is vacant, they can appeal that and we reduce the charge. If the charge was calculated incorrectly, they can appeal that, but there is no process for a hardship.
So if we can, let's circle back around to item 3. What I'd like to do is get a draft of your annual report to look at our next meeting, which would then be pretty much the beginning of the next calendar year that it could go to the board. 2 meetings ago, or maybe 1 meeting ago, I included all the previous annual reports in the packet so you could get a kind of a tenor or a flavor. And they've been somewhat unchanging. You know, the recommendation has always been, you need to sunset this charge. And I know now we've got kind of a mixed group of folks, some who don't think that the charge should be sunset until Measure J is clarified, and some who think it should be sunset yesterday. There was support for the local projects, and we're not seeing as many applications for local project funding, grant funding, as we did when it first became available. But are there particular issues that you all want to put on the table and see if there's enough support to carry it through to the annual report? Seeing no hands raised.
Let me think this through.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I think you want to make sure you talk about a little bit is the mechanic bank loan and what's going on with the current plans for bringing that down and setting aside money to pay it. I think everybody on this committee, or most of the people on this committee, have wanted that to start happening, and it is happening now. So I would support that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you too. You know, it's one of the primary barriers to sunsetting, of course, when you've secured debt with a particular charge. So I think that does need to be highlighted. Anybody else? Okay,
Jason Powell has his hand raised.
Okay, yeah, hey, Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, it just when you mentioned, as long as we're working on paying off water supply charges, it made me realize what a clever title for this charge. And a lot of people say we don't have enough water supply generally for the peninsula. So it makes me think that this, like as was predicted, that this charge may be on the books for quite a while until we actually solve our water supply problems. Is that true?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have contemplated is, and because a significant piece of the user fee predated certain portions of Proposition 218. So we would never fully get rid of the authorization for the user fee, but we might reduce its collections. And we might do the same thing with the water supply charge, because in order to, if we eliminate it and vacate it, so to speak, then if a new water supply project was needed or an augmentation was needed, we'd have to go back through a Prop 218 process. So one of the concepts is reduce it when you can, but if you need to augment your water supply, then you bring it back up so that you don't have to go through another Prop 218 process. So to the extent you believe folks who say that pure water expansion is not enough and that we're going to need more water projects, then it would have to very likely stick around a while. There are those of us who believe that pure water expansion will be enough for a couple decades. So that would allow us to reduce its collection to, you know, just a baseline level for a while. I think that when we do the expansion, there's going to be another round of operating reserve required, where we buy the water and we don't sell that water, it just sits on the ground. And then there's a little bit of discussion about building up a drought reserve and who would pay for that and how would it get paid for. But I think as of right now, it looks like that'll be purchased water by Cal-Am rather than by us. And so there will be an offset. It'll still end up in your rates, but it won't end up in the water supply charge. So Jason, it's not a really good answer. I don't think it'll stick around in whole for a long period of time. I think there will be room to sunset.
Okay, thank you. No, actually, I think I like that answer because it's realistic, at least for me. I'd love to be an optimist and say we're going to solve all our water supply problems in the near future, but it doesn't feel, as things get drier and drier, it doesn't feel like it. So water is going to become more expensive no matter how you slice it, and whether this is one of the ways to get the revenue to supply the water, it's one of the ways to do it. That's the way I see it. So.
Yeah.
I would hate to see you lose a source of income and have to go through the whole 218 process again, even if you can bring that down to a minimum. it represents an asset for future endeavors. And I don't know where Measure J works into all this, but I do support Measure J. So I really want to see whatever needs to be done to get to the other side of that canyon remain intact if it's needed for financial stability and doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Susan. I think that's the one topic no one really wants to talk about, because there's strong voices on this committee and elsewhere who think that the water supply charge should not come anywhere near Measure J, obviously. And there are also strong voices and members of this committee who think that the district should collect all the money it can from all the sources it can until Measure J has resolved itself in order to protect ourselves against things like what John referred to, you know, the $20 million unknown, which based on what we're seeing out of CalAm's attorneys, they're working really hard to make that number come to fruition. So
Yeah, it keeps going up.
yeah, it does. All right. We've talked a little bit about the user fee. It's the next item on our agenda.
Dave, before we continue, do you want to ask for public comment for items 2, 3, and 4?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for keeping me on the straight.
So if you would like to make public comment on items 2, 3, or 4, please raise your hand. Dave, I do not see anybody with their hands raised. So
Great.
Back to you.
So item 5, there's a nice chart in there. You can, of course, see the variability continues by season, but we're beginning to see some, I don't know, predictability on an annual basis, as you can see. You know, it's been, and it's been rising because CalAm rates have been rising. So it's not sustainable that we would continue to ride up with CalAm rates indefinitely. You know, at some point, public agencies aren't supposed to make a profit. And so as we continue to ride up, it will be, you know, repay that deficit and repay the Mechanics Bank loan, repay the deficit to the other funds, which will have some impact on our ability to continue to pay the expenses of Measure J, because you're repaying funds that have been borrowed from, so that money stays with the district. But then sunsetting, and then you'll have the ability to look at both charges and say, well, we want to sunset the user fee, the water supply charge, but do we do it at 100%, or do we decrease the user fee so that the impact on your water bill is not as high an impact? And that's a policy question our board will have to address at some point. But we will, you know, I see it, you know, within the next few years, we're going to have to make that decision. I wouldn't say the next 2 years, but with the completion of Pure Water Monterey expansion and where we sit at that point in time, we're going to have to make a decision about, do you reduce the user fee and the water supply charge, or do you really reduce the water supply charge and leave the user fee at its current level? But, you know, as I said, we're not a couple years from that decision. We're probably several years from that decision. Okay. Item 6, I just wanted to let you know that, and you probably already do know, that we've agreed on a form of a water purchase agreement for Pure Water Monterey expansion. We are trying to get a one-page agreement, because you've got the 2 public agencies who said, okay, publicly, we've adopted this form of the water purchase agreement. We'd like a document that says CalAm is committed to sign it if the PUC approves it, so that we can begin funding. Otherwise, we need a signed water purchase agreement to begin funding, because you can't move forward and expend money if you're not certain you're going to have an agreement. You know, so we need an agreement to agree, or we need the agreement itself. We have a little bit of back and forth going on between our desires to just immediately enter into a water purchase agreement through settlement of our complaint with the PUC, versus CalAm's desires to take it through an application process that could take as little as 180 days, if not longer. And I don't know, Fran, if you want to weigh in on any of that, but it's just, we don't know what path it's going to go right now.
I would just say, based on their delays associated with COVID, I don't think any expedited proceeding is a realistic thought. And so I see it being a prolonged process, which is why we are trying to get the parties to settle and say we all agree on what was negotiated and approved by the two public boards. And just have the commission say, yes, we agree.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Path of least resistance, but we're having some resistance. So also on water supply, I want to let you know that the 2 additional deep injection wells for the Pure Water Monterey project are experiencing a slight delay due to supply chain problems. And we think the subcontractors are going to use force majeure. Basically, there's pumps that have to be assembled or manufactured, and there's pieces that they just can't get in a timely fashion due to all these supply chain interruptions that have resulted as a result of COVID. So that's an interesting one for us. Pure Water Monterey expansion really can't start until we have some agreement in place, as I mentioned. So the time for completion will be an issue if we don't get started soon. We basically need about 6 months to get to bid documents, and then about 20 months from that point forward. So I've been saying it's about 30 months start to finish, which would get us done by the end of 2023, the very beginning of 2024. And then ASR is complete. The only thing left to do there is a landscape plan. And as you're probably very well aware, there's no movement on desalination, although the company continues to state that they're going to continue to pursue it because they believe it's ultimately needed for the community. So we just don't know what that really means, how aggressively they're going to pursue it. They've got a lot of hurdles that they would have to clear to go back to the Coastal Commission, and not much work has been done on most of those hurdles. So any questions on water supply? There will be a presentation to our board Monday night, which demonstrates how tight we're going to be until Pure Water Monterey expansion comes online as a community. I think it's important for all of us to at least understand that for next year, there's sufficient water, but if it doesn't rain this next rainy season, then we're going to end up tapping reserves. The following year, when all of the limits on the Carmel River kick in to the very baseline, we are going to see the need to run the base project of Pure Water Monterey at a higher capacity than we have been and deliver more water than the contractual amount in order to provide additional supply to not violate the cease and desist order or to overpump the Seaside Basin. Ultimately, if push came to shove and we can't produce enough excess water and we've run out of our drought reserve from aquifer storage and recovery and drought persists, then I think the company would have to overpump the Seaside Basin and incur potential future replenishment costs. But under no circumstances would I expect them to overpump the Carmel River and incur any penalties or fines from the State Water Board for that purpose. There's two hands up.
Yes, Dave, we need public comment on items 5 and 6.
Yep, let's go first to the questions from the panelists. John, we'll go to you first and then Melody.
No, thanks, Dave. So when you say we'd go into reserves, specifically which reserves? Are we talking about the 1,000 acre foot?
Yeah,
bank,
right.
No,
yeah. Well, we could tap that as well. You're right. The operating reserve. Then we'd have a makeup obligation. But no, we've got about 1,200 acre feet sitting in the ground from aquifer storage and recovery. that we have not taken out for over a year now. And the current water supply budget doesn't anticipate taking it out in the next 2 quarters, six months. And that'll give us time to see what happens with the rainy season. You know, we got some other issues with, we need to complete a bypass pipeline so we can get all the months that we can out of aquifer storage and recovery. But if it rains, then we won't have to tap that 1,200 acre feet as much because we'll have put more back into ASR. So, you know, it's, what's the old saying that hope is not a strategy or something like that? But that's kind of what we're relying on, is one look at what the rainy season will bring us, and then that'll inform what's going to happen in the several quarters after the rainy season next year. But because we're in a transition year going, you know, water years are October 1 to the September 30th, and calendar years are obviously calendar years. And so the way the cease and desist order was written, the water year planning gets a little bit of this calendar year and then 3/4 of next calendar year in it. So the company can take about 4,100 acre feet from the river. And then the following year, they're only gonna be able to take 3,300 acre feet. So there's a little, you know, call it an 800 acre foot buffer just by overlapping water years and calendar years. So it's really the year after that that becomes really important. And also being able to operate Pure Water Monterey to its full capacity and sell the company additional water. So I don't see us tapping the operating reserve for Pure Water Monterey. I see us tapping the 1,200 ASR acre feet that have been sitting in the ground.
And when I hear about overdrafting of the Seaside Basin, I would encourage the district to really keep an eye on Sentinel wells so that we know what's happening within that basin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. That would worry me to have to overdraft the basin. So it's already
Yeah.
overdrafted.
Yeah.
It's
That's
really
a very good
precarious,
point.
and I
Yeah.
worry about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion with the Seaside Water Master about whether the safe yield that they've come up with is actually sustainable, and if they need to revisit those numbers as well to a reduced amount. So, yeah, stay tuned.
And is
Yeah, go ahead.
the Sand City plant also pulling brackish water, which could affect the
I'm
basin
doing
as well?
very well.
Yeah, so Jason asked, isn't the Sand City desal plant a factor? You know, it's pulling brackish water. Yeah, and they are undergoing, I think, actually at their next city council meeting, approval to develop some additional well capacity because their intake wells had been failing. You know, we're counting on them for about 200 acre feet a year. They did 195 acre feet in 2020, so it's not too far off. But they were designed to do 300 acre feet a year, and they haven't really achieved that at all, I think, since the beginning. Melody, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so Dave, when you're saying push the Pure Water Monterey project to its peak, are you talking about beyond the 4,000 acre feet that includes the 500 of the new two deep wells, or not?
No, an additional 500. So get it to about 4,000. Yeah.
So that's what it's scheduled to have because of the two new deep wells, right?
Well, the two new deep wells allow us to do it, but contractually we're only obligated to deliver 3,500. And so in order to provide an interim supply, CalAm will agree to purchase an additional 500 acre feet a year, or whatever we believe they need. You know, it could be 400, it could be 350 or something like that. But yeah, and we couldn't do that without that additional injection capacity with the deep wells.
And you're saying those wells are how much delayed because of the parts they can't get?
Yeah, just a few months. So instead of December of this calendar year, it'll be like February, March of next calendar year. So, you know, that should work out well.
So it's not a major problem, all right.
Correct. Jason, did you have anything else? It sounded like you were saying something right before Melody.
Yeah, that the Sand City desal plant is not producing what it was supposed to, and I believe that's because the water quality that they're drawing is saltier than they thought it would be. Isn't that why it's underperforming?
It's a combination, and it's saltier water going in when you have dry seasons. The brackish water is relying on natural rainwater to dilute it to make it brackish. So when you get a higher salt content, then that means your discharge water is higher in salt. And their deal with the state on discharge was that they would discharge water that's at approximately seawater salinity. And yeah, so they've been having trouble meeting that whenever the intake water is saltier than the outfall water, and they discharge into the beach sands. So they're not supposed to discharge something that's higher in salinity than the seawater. But they're hopeful that these new extraction wells for input will help remedy the situation. I do know that when you go through sustained periods of drought, like we did in 13, 14, and 15, that it was more a problem of the quality of the water going in. But the wells themselves are also reaching kind of their useful life limit and need to be replaced.
Dave, I have a question about the Seaside Basin. We heard all this about that, supposedly it was seawater intruded. Was that just, that's not true now because it was really just a broken well?
Yes.
So it's not seawater intruded.
It is not seawater intrusion, but
That probably should be put out there because that kind of got left with the public that,
and
the seawater.
And rest assured, there's a front where seawater is lurking and we just don't see it until it hits ground, the land that we can actually drill into. So it could be, 5 feet offshore or 500 feet offshore or further. But you're absolutely right. And what's interesting about that one, that was a Fort Ord number 9 well, shallow. So it's a monitoring well. And the Sentinel wells are actually much more coastal. This one's a little bit inland. And so it gave us a real kind of counterintuitive initial reaction, which is why would we see seawater at a well that's further in from the Sentinel wells? And then it was suggested, maybe it's coming in from the north. And so it's already seawater intruded kind of up a little in Old Fort Ord where we're not monitoring, and it's kind of worked its way around the corner and coming down from the north. And what it really turned out to be was the beach sands do have seawater in them, of course, and the seal was breached. And so the aroma sand formation that sits on the tippy top released actual seawater down into the what's called the Paso Robles aquifer. But yeah, you're right. That was probably not well publicized that it was not seawater intrusion. But the threat of seawater intrusion is always there because, as one of you mentioned earlier, it is in deficit. So it's like a saucer or a coffee cup. And that the biggest depression is generally up, I said generally, up near General Jim Moore Boulevard, kind of, up that way towards the International School in Seaside. That's kind of the center focus of the deepest depression. But what happens is when fresh water gets lower in elevation than seawater, then the seawater is trying to fill that cup up. And that's what's happened up in the north in the 180 and the 400 aquifer and all those seawater intrusion lines you see in the weekly every other year. And so what happens is if you pull all the fresh water out, you don't have a barrier to push against the seawater. That hasn't happened fully in Seaside, but the depression is, that's the first step in getting there, which is you put a big depression in, and then your fresh water goes to fill that depression, and then your seawater goes to kind of backfill. And so if we have, a prolonged period of drought, rain is not filling in that depression. And the only way we're attempting to fill in the depression is by not pumping as much as they did, back in 2006. But ultimately, and I know Paul Bruno's no longer with us, but he is still on the water master. Ultimately, they need to figure out a way to actually get new supplies into that depression, and that what we call protected water levels. But there's no plan in place yet for that.
I had a question.
Yeah.
I know there was discussion with the water master trying to get the district and Marina Coast Water District to try to replace that number 9 well and maybe do some additional monitoring kind of stuff. But is that made any progress, or is that just sitting on the table still?
It's not making progress. Yeah, the water master sent us a letter saying, we really want you in, but we haven't heard back from Marina Coast Water District yet. So, and they've got a lot of other things on their plate.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, anybody else? All right, I want to, we can all say goodbye to John Tilley because he's the taxpayers rep.
Before we do that, do we want to take public comment on?
Oh, yeah, I'm
5 and
sorry.
6?
5 and 6.
Yep, items 5 and 6. Any public comment?
Please raise your hand. If you have comments on item number 5 and 6. Give a second here. Dave, I do not see anybody with their hand raised.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, John.
John,
Yeah, and
Dave,
this-
John.
Bye, John.
Dave, I've also
Yep.
been advised by our attorney for MCAR not to participate in the closed session. So I'll see you.
Okay, that's fine. You're not a named party in the lawsuit, so we didn't know if that matters to you or not. So you're not obligated to go off, but if that's your direction, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Have a great rest of the session. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
And Dave, is it okay if Alvin and George
Yeah, you could bring them over.
bring them
That-
over? Okay.
And then we can release the rest of the public.
And then I'll let you know when I've locked the meeting.
Okay.